The courtroom erupted in chaos. All eyes were on the young black woman in the gray hoodie standing before the bench, her posture unnervingly relaxed despite the judge's apoplectic rage. Judge Smith Lawrence, a man whose reputation for explosive outbursts had earned him the nickname the Hanging Judge, had been tearing into her for the past 15 minutes, his voice rising with each accusation. "You walk into M.Y. courtroom dressed like you're going to a basketball game?" Lawrence bellowed, his jowls quivering with indignation. "You refuse to stand when addressed? You dare to smirk at the authority of this bench." He leaned forward, his knuckles white against the wood. "Young lady, you are a disgrace. A stain. The kind of disrespectful delinquent that makes this country weep for its future." The gallery murmured in uncomfortable agreement. Several court officers positioned themselves near the exits, anticipating trouble. The girl simply tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes never leaving Lawrence's face. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. And that made him even angrier. "I've had enough," Lawrence roared, slamming his gavel so hard it cracked against the sound block. "Bailiff, take this child into custody for contempt of court. 72 hours in county lockup ought to teach her some respect." Then she spoke. Her voice was quiet, measured, and cut through the noise like a surgical blade. "Your Honor, I'd like to note for the record that you've just ordered the arrest of a citizen for a traffic violation without due process, denied counsel, and imposed punitive detention based solely on your personal offense." She pulled a small notepad from her hoodie pocket and clicked a pen. "That's 3 constitutional violations in under 30 seconds. Impressive, even for you." The courtroom went dead silent. Lawrence's face drained of color, then flushed a deep, mottled crimson. Several lawyers in the gallery exchanged shocked glances. The prosecutor assigned to the case stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Objection," he stammered, though it was unclear what he was objecting to. "Your Honor, I don't know who this person thinks she is, but this is highly irregular. She can't just—" "I can provide credentials if necessary," the girl interrupted, her tone almost bored. "But I assure you, every observation I've made is legally sound and fully documented." She reached into her hoodie pocket and produced a leather bifold. "Shall we continue this charade, Your Honor? Or would you like to see my identification first?" Lawrence's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the bench. Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice cracking. The girl walked forward with deliberate calm, her sneakers squeaking softly on the polished floor. She handed the bifold to the bailiff, who carried it up to the bench as if it might explode. Lawrence opened it with shaking fingers. His eyes widened. His mouth fell open. The blood drained from his face completely. The badge was unmistakable. High Court Auditor, Judicial Oversight Division. And beneath it, the name, Nora Cain, Special Investigator. The gavel slipped from Lawrence's hand and clattered to the floor. The audience sat frozen, breathless, waiting for what would come next. Now let's go back to where it all began. The story started 6 weeks earlier, in the glass and steel offices of the Federal Judicial Oversight Commission in Washington, D.C. 19-year-old Nora Cain sat across from Director Marcus Holloway, her expression as neutral as a blank page. She had been a child prodigy, the kind of student who memorized entire legal codes before most kids learned to drive, who'd passed the bar exam at 16 just to prove she could. Despite her brilliance, Nora had deliberately avoided the spotlight. She despised the attention, the media circus that followed genius children. Instead, she'd quietly joined the Commission's auditing division, a shadowy branch that investigated judicial misconduct from the inside. Director Holloway slid a thick manila folder across the desk. Smith Lawrence. District Court, Eastern Jurisdiction. 47 formal complaints in 3 years. Disproportionate sentencing patterns. Possible financial ties to Stonegate Private Youth Facility. He tapped the folder. We need someone who can go in undetected. Someone he'll underestimate. Nora opened the folder and scanned the first page. A grainy photograph of Lawrence, red-faced and pointing at a teenage defendant. Beneath it, a quote from a court transcript. These people don't deserve mercy. They deserve consequences. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. These people, she repeated quietly. He means black kids. That's what we need to prove, Holloway said. Can you do it? Nora closed the folder and met his gaze. When do I start? 3 days later, Nora received a carefully crafted traffic citation. Failure to yield at an intersection, a minor infraction that would land her directly in Lawrence's courtroom. She dressed in a hoodie and worn jeans, pulling her hair back into a simple ponytail. She erased every trace of the calculated Ivy League-educated auditor and became exactly what Lawrence expected to see, another disrespectful black teenager he could bully from the bench. But as she walked through the courthouse metal detectors that morning, a tiny camera lens hidden in her collar and a digital recorder stitched into the lining of her bag, Nora felt a cold clarity settle over her. This wasn't just about catching a corrupt judge. This was about every kid Lawrence had thrown into the system, every family he'd destroyed with a careless swing of his gavel. Smith Lawrence thought he was untouchable. He thought he was teaching a lesson. He had no idea he was about to face his final exam. Director Marcus Holloway didn't look up from the file when Nora entered his office. That was his tell. When a case was bad enough to make him uncomfortable, he buried himself in the paperwork like it might offer some kind of absolution. Sit, he said, still not meeting her eyes. Nora settled into the chair across from his desk, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. She'd learned early that silence was a weapon, and she wielded it now, waiting. The afternoon light filtering through the blinds cut harsh lines across Holloway's weathered face, making him look older than his 53 years. Finally, he slid the manila folder across the polished wood. It landed in front of her with a soft thud that felt heavier than it should have. Smith Lawrence. District Court, Eastern Jurisdiction. Holloway's voice was flat, clinical. 47 formal complaints in 3 years. Disproportionate sentencing patterns, particularly for black and Latino defendants aged 14 to 19. We've also got whispers, nothing concrete yet, of financial ties to Stonegate Private Youth Facility. Nora opened the folder. The first thing she saw was a photograph clipped to the inside cover. Judge Lawrence mid-tirade, red-faced and furious, his finger jabbing toward a teenage defendant whose face had been pixelated for privacy. Beneath the photo, a quote from the court transcript made her jaw tighten. These people don't deserve mercy. They deserve consequences. She read it twice, letting the words settle like stones in her chest. These people, she repeated quietly, her tone carefully neutral. He means black kids. That's what we need to prove. Holloway leaned back in his chair, finally meeting her gaze. Problem is, Lawrence is smart. Careful. He knows exactly how far he can push without leaving fingerprints. Every ruling technically falls within his discretionary power. Every sentence has just enough legal cover to survive appeal. Nora flipped through the pages. Assault charges that should have been dismissed. 6 months in juvie. Marijuana possession. First offense. 9 months. Failure to appear for a traffic violation. Contempt. 72 hours in county lockup. The pattern was clear if you knew how to look, but proving intent was another matter entirely. We need someone on the inside, Holloway said. Someone he'll underestimate. Someone who can document his behavior in real time, catch him when he thinks no one's watching. He paused, his expression almost apologetic. Someone who looks exactly like the kids he's been burying. Nora closed the folder and met his eyes. She knew what he was asking, knew what it would cost, not just professionally but personally. She'd have to become the very thing people assumed she was when they saw a young black woman and refused to see anything else. She'd have to let Lawrence's prejudice work against him, use his own hatred as the rope to hang him with. "When do I start?" she asked. Holloway's shoulders sagged slightly, relief and regret mixing in equal measure. 72 hours. We'll fabricate a traffic citation. Something minor. Failure to yield at an intersection. Nora stood, tucking the folder under her arm. As she reached the door, Holloway called after her. "Nora." His voice was quieter now, almost gentle. "Be careful. Men like Lawrence don't go down easy." She glanced back, her expression unreadable. "Neither do I." The holding cell smelled like disinfectant and despair, a combination Nora had studied in theory but never experienced firsthand. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly pale glow that made the cinder block walls look even more oppressive than they already were. She sat on the metal bench, her back against the wall, and waited. Patience was another weapon in her arsenal. 3 other women shared the cell. 2 appeared to be in their early 20s, both visibly exhausted, slumped against opposite walls like bookends. The third was maybe 17, curled into herself in the corner, her shoulders shaking with silent tears. Nora gave it 15 minutes before she spoke. "First time?" she asked the girl in the corner, her voice deliberately casual. The girl's head snapped up, eyes red and swollen. "What? First time in lockup. I can tell." Nora shifted slightly, making herself smaller, less threatening. "You get used to the smell eventually." One of the older women snorted. "You don't get used to shit in here, baby girl. You just go numb." She looked at Nora with tired eyes. "What did they get you for?" "Traffic violation. Failure to yield." Nora shrugged. "Judge Lawrence didn't like my attitude." The reaction was immediate. The woman who'd spoken sat up straighter. The other one actually laughed, bitter and sharp. Even the crying girl stopped shaking long enough to stare. "Lawrence," the first woman repeated, shaking her head. "Yeah, that tracks. That man put me away for 6 months over a gram of weed. First offense. Meanwhile, my boyfriend's cousin, white kid from the suburbs, got community service for the same damn thing a month later in the next county over." "He gave my brother 9 months for shoplifting," the second woman said, her voice flat with resignation. 17 years old. No priors. 9 months. Said he needed to learn accountability before it's too late. Like 9 months in juvie was gonna teach him anything except how to survive. Nora pulled the small notepad from her hoodie pocket, the one they hadn't confiscated because it looked too innocent to matter. "What was your brother's name?" The woman hesitated, suspicion flickering across her face. "Why?" "Because someone should remember," Nora said simply. "Someone should write it down." Something in her tone must have convinced them, because the stories started flowing. The 17-year-old had been held in contempt for crying during her hearing. 72 hours for disrupting court proceedings. The first woman's cousin had gotten a year for violating probation by missing a single check-in because she'd been hospitalized. Another girl, not present but spoken of in hushed, reverent tones, had tried to represent herself and been sentenced to 6 months for attempting to practice law without a license. Each story followed the same pattern. Minor infractions, maximum consequences, and always, always, the same demographic. Young. Black or brown. Poor enough that they couldn't afford lawyers who might actually fight back. Nora wrote it all down, her pen moving steadily across the page. Names. Dates. Case numbers when they could remember them. She didn't tell them who she was. Not yet. But she made them a silent promise with every word she recorded. Lawrence thought 72 hours would break her. He had no idea he'd just locked her in a room with his greatest mistakes, and they were all too eager to talk. The bailiff's keys jangled in the lock at precisely 9:47 a.m., 18 hours into Nora's 72-hour sentence. She'd been expecting this. Holloway's team worked fast when they needed to, but the women in the cell with her didn't know that. "Cain," the bailiff barked. "You made bail. Let's go." Nora stood slowly, tucking her notepad back into her pocket. The other women watched her with expressions somewhere between envy and resignation. She caught the eye of the 17-year-old in the corner and gave her the smallest nod. A promise. Then she followed the bailiff out into the fluorescent hallway. "Someone important must like you," he muttered as they walked. "Don't see Lawrence's contempt charges getting dropped this fast." Nora said nothing. She'd learned that silence made people uncomfortable enough to fill it with useful information. Got some fancy lawyers waiting upstairs. Federal types. The bailiff glanced at her sideways, curiosity getting the better of his professionalism. "What did you do to rate that kind of attention?" "Existed," Nora said flatly. 40 minutes later, she walked back into courtroom 4B wearing the same hoodie, the same worn jeans, but carrying something she hadn't had before: absolute certainty. The gallery was fuller this time. Word had spread about the disrespectful girl Lawrence had thrown in lockup, and people loved a spectacle. Lawrence sat behind the bench reviewing paperwork, his expression smug. He didn't look up when she entered, didn't acknowledge her presence until she was standing directly before him. When he finally raised his eyes, his smile was predatory. "Back so soon?" He leaned forward, relishing the moment. "I trust your time in county accommodation taught you some humility. Ready to apologize to this court. Actually, Your Honor, I'd like to make a statement for the record." Lawrence's smile widened. "Oh, this should be good. By all means, enlighten us." Nora reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out the leather bifold she'd been carrying since day one. She walked forward with deliberate calm, each footstep echoing in the sudden silence. The bailiff who'd escorted her from lockup intercepted her, taking the credentials with visible confusion. He carried them up to the bench like they might detonate. Lawrence opened the bifold with an expression of condescending amusement that lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then his face went white. His hands started trembling. The bifold slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the desk. The badge gleamed under the courtroom lights. High Court Auditor, Judicial Oversight Division. Below it, her name in crisp black letters. Nora Cain, Special Investigator. "For the record," Nora said, her voice carrying across the dead-silent courtroom, "I've documented 47 distinct protocol violations, including unlawful detention, denial of due process, and abuse of contempt powers. I've also obtained sworn statements from 6 individuals currently or formerly detained under your orders, detailing a pattern of discriminatory sentencing practices." Lawrence's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Someone in the gallery gasped. The court reporter's fingers froze above her machine. "This court is now under formal investigation," Nora continued. "All proceedings will be suspended pending review by the Federal Judicial Oversight Commission." She paused, letting the weight of it settle. "You're done, Your Honor." The gavel Lawrence had used to silence so many fell from his numb fingers and rolled across the bench, coming to rest at the edge like a period at the end of a very long, very damning sentence. The subpoena hit Lawrence's financial records like a surgical strike at 6 a.m. the following morning. By 9 a.m., Nora was sitting in a converted conference room 3 floors above the courtroom, surrounded by boxes that smelled like old paper and institutional negligence. She'd sent the rest of Holloway's team home. This part she needed to do alone. The first box contained standard banking statements. Checking, savings, a modest investment account that matched what a district court judge should reasonably have. Nothing suspicious. Nothing that would survive even casual scrutiny from anyone looking for impropriety. That's why Nora knew to keep digging. She found it in Box 7, buried beneath 3 years of utility bills and mortgage statements. A second set of bank records for an account held under Lawrence's wife's maiden name. The deposits were regular, methodical. $5,000, transferred on the 15th of every month from an LLC called Meridian Consulting Services. Nora pulled her laptop closer and started searching. Meridian Consulting Services was a shell company, registered in Delaware, with exactly 2 listed clients. One was a lobbying firm that had dissolved 4 years ago. The other was Stonegate Private Youth Facility. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling threads, following money. Stonegate was a privately owned detention center that housed juvenile offenders from 6 surrounding counties. They billed the state $230 per day per child. The more beds they filled, the more money they made. And Judge Smith Lawrence had been filling those beds at a remarkable rate. Nora cross-referenced the dates. Every $15,000 quarterly bonus Stonegate received for maintaining above 90% capacity coincided with a $5,000 deposit into Lawrence's secret account. The pattern went back 37 months. She pulled up Lawrence's sentencing records and overlaid them with Stonegate's occupancy rates. The correlation was damning. Whenever capacity dropped below 85%, Lawrence's courtroom saw a sudden spike in detention sentences. Minor infractions that should have resulted in probation or community service instead became 6-month stays. First-time offenders got treated like career criminals. The math was sickening. At $5,000 per month, Lawrence had collected $185,000 in kickbacks. In exchange, he'd sent an estimated 237 children to Stonegate. Children who didn't need to be there, whose lives had been derailed not by justice but by profit margins. Nora found a spreadsheet on Lawrence's personal computer titled Placement Recommendations. It was a list of upcoming cases with notes in the margins. Stonegate, 6 months. Stonegate, probation violation, 4 months. Community service, capacity high this month. He'd been treating children like inventory, like units to be moved and monetized. She sat back in her chair, the cold fury she'd kept carefully controlled since this investigation began finally breaking through her professional detachment. These weren't just statistics. They were the women she'd met in that holding cell. The 17-year-old girl crying in the corner. The brothers and cousins and friends whose names she'd written in her notepad. Nora pulled out her phone and called Holloway. "I've got him," she said when he answered. "Wire fraud, racketeering, conspiracy to violate civil rights. And I can prove all of it." There was a long pause on the other end. Then Holloway's voice, tight with controlled rage. "How many kids?" 237 that I can document. Probably more. "Bring me everything," Holloway said. "We're taking him down today." Nora knew something was wrong the moment she saw the police cruiser parked behind her rental car. She'd left the courthouse at 11:47 p.m., her arms full of evidence boxes, her mind already cataloging the next steps in building an airtight case against Lawrence. The parking garage had been nearly empty, just a handful of vehicles scattered across 3 levels. Her car sat under a flickering fluorescent light on level 2, and the black and white was positioned directly behind it, blocking her in. 2 officers stood beside her driver's door. One she didn't recognize, young, maybe late 20s, with the rigid posture of someone trying too hard to project authority. The other was older, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. Chief Deputy Frank Mercer. She'd seen his name in Lawrence's phone records. "Miss Cain," Mercer said, his voice deceptively pleasant. "Bit late to be leaving work, isn't it?" Nora set the boxes on the ground carefully. keeping her movements slow and visible. "Is there a problem, Deputy?" "That depends." Mercer gestured to her car with an almost lazy wave. "We received an anonymous tip about suspicious activity in this garage. Someone matching your description. Acting nervous around this vehicle. We're going to need to search it." The lie was so transparent it was almost insulting. "You'll need a warrant for that." "Actually, we've got probable cause." The younger officer spoke up, eager to prove himself. "Anonymous tip plus observed suspicious behavior constitutes." "I'm a federal investigator," Nora interrupted, her tone ice-cold. "And I've been inside that courthouse for the past 6 hours, which you'd know if you'd actually received any legitimate tip. So let's skip the performance and get to the part where you tell me what Judge Lawrence promised you." Mercer's pleasant expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Calculation. Strong accusations, Miss Cain. Careful now. Wouldn't want to add defamation to your troubles. What troubles would those be? Instead of answering, Mercer nodded to the younger officer, who moved to her car and peered through the driver's side window. His reaction was perfectly timed. Surprise, concern, alarm. Textbook bad acting. "Chief, you need to see this." Nora's stomach dropped even as her mind raced ahead, seeing the trap closing. She watched Mercer approach the window, watched him look inside with exaggerated shock. "Well now," Mercer said slowly, "that appears to be a firearm on the passenger seat. Visible from outside the vehicle. No attempt at concealment." He turned to Nora with mock sympathy. "You got a permit to carry in this state, Miss Cain?" She didn't. Couldn't. Federal auditors weren't authorized to carry weapons. It was explicitly forbidden in their employment contracts. And Lawrence would have known that. The gun sitting on her passenger seat was a Glock 19, still in its box, completely untouched. It might as well have had Lawrence's fingerprints on it, except she knew it wouldn't. He was too smart for that. Too careful. "That's not mine," Nora said, hating how cliché it sounded even as she said it. "They always say that." Mercer pulled out his handcuffs with practiced ease. "Turn around, Miss Cain. Hands behind your back. You're making a mistake." "No," Mercer said quietly, close enough now that only she could hear. "You made the mistake. You should have left the judge alone." The emergency hearing convened at 2 p.m. in a federal courtroom 200 miles from Lawrence's jurisdiction. Nora sat at the prosecutor's table, her wrists still bearing faint marks from Mercer's handcuffs. She'd been released 4 hours after her arrest when Holloway's team descended on the local precinct with enough federal paperwork to bury a small city. The planted gun had disappeared from evidence within 90 minutes. Convenient. But Nora had something better than the gun now. She had Deputy Chief Mercer's patrol car footage, time-stamped and geotagged, showing him entering the courthouse parking garage 47 minutes before the anonymous tip was called in. She had phone records showing 3 calls between Lawrence's personal cell and Mercer's between 10:15 p.m. and 10:43 p.m. And she had a very angry federal magistrate who did not appreciate attempts to intimidate federal investigators. Judge Margaret Chen presided, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her expression carved from granite. Lawrence sat at the defense table beside a lawyer who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past week. His expensive suit couldn't hide the tremor in his hands or the sweat beading on his upper lip. "Ms. Cain," Judge Chen said, "the court recognizes you as special prosecutor in this matter. You may proceed." Nora stood, smoothing her blazer. No hoodie today. No disguise. Just herself, and that was terrifying enough. "Your Honor, the evidence demonstrates a clear pattern of corruption spanning 37 months. Judge Lawrence received $185,000 in kickbacks from Stonegate Private Youth Facility in exchange for systematically sentencing juvenile defendants to detention rather than alternative programs." She clicked a remote. The screen behind her lit up with the spreadsheet from Lawrence's computer. This document, recovered from Judge Lawrence's personal laptop, shows a deliberate scheme to maintain Stonegate's occupancy rates. You'll note the margin comments. Stonegate, 6 months. Capacity high this month. Probation violation. Lawrence's lawyer stood. Your Honor, there's no proof my client created that document. Anyone with access to his computer could have. The metadata shows it was created using Judge Lawrence's personal Microsoft account. Nora interrupted. Same account linked to his home IP address. Same account he used to correspond with Stonegate's director. She advanced to the next slide. Here's an email from Lawrence to Director Raymond Kowalski, dated March 15th. Numbers looking thin this quarter. We'll see what I can do about pipeline. Judge Chin leaned forward. Pipeline. Children, Your Honor. He called them a pipeline. The courtroom went silent. Even Lawrence's lawyer had nothing to say to that. Nora continued, her voice steady despite the rage burning beneath her professional composure. When I began documenting these violations, Judge Lawrence conspired with Deputy Chief Frank Mercer to plant evidence in my vehicle and have me arrested. We have phone records, surveillance footage, and testimony from Officer James Booker, who has agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency. She placed a thick binder on the judge's bench. This contains sworn statements from 43 individuals wrongfully sentenced under Judge Lawrence's authority. Their stories are remarkably consistent. Judge Chin opened the binder, her expression darkening as she read. Lawrence stared at the table, his face ashen. Your Honor, Nora said quietly, Judge Lawrence didn't just break the law. He weaponized his courtroom against the most vulnerable people in his community. He sold children for profit. The knock came at 11:34 p.m., sharp and deliberate. 3 raps, a pause, then 3 more. Nora had been expecting something like this. Men like Lawrence didn't go down quietly, and cornered animals were always most dangerous. She'd checked into the hotel under a false name, paid cash, parked her rental in a lot 3 blocks away. Standard precautions. Apparently not enough. She approached the door silently, checking the peephole. A man stood in the hallway wearing civilian clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, but she recognized the way he carried himself. Law enforcement. Probably former military before that. The kind of person who knew how to hurt people efficiently. I know you're in there, Miss Cain. His voice was calm, almost conversational. Just want to talk. No trouble. Nora pulled out her phone and started recording, then positioned herself to the side of the door, out of the direct line if he decided to kick it in. Identify yourself. Name's Garrett. I work security for the courthouse. Well, used to. A pause. Judge Lawrence suggested I have a conversation with you. Friendly like. The judge is currently under federal investigation and barred from any contact with witnesses or investigators. So this friendly conversation is witness tampering. Nora kept her voice steady, professional. I'm documenting this interaction. Leave now and I won't add you to the charges. She heard him chuckle, low and humorless. You're smart. I'll give you that. But smart people know when to walk away from fights they can't win. Is that a threat? It's advice. Garrett's shadow shifted under the door. See, the thing about auditors like you is you think everything's about evidence and procedure. But out here in the real world, the judge has friends. People who owe him. People who don't like outsiders coming in and disrupting things. Nora's finger hovered over the emergency call button on her phone. If you're here to scare me into dropping the investigation, you're wasting both our time. Not trying to scare you. His voice dropped lower, intimate and menacing. Just helping you understand the situation. Federal protection only goes so far. Eventually, you'll be alone in a parking garage again. Or a grocery store. Or maybe asleep in a hotel room with shitty locks. The doorknob rattled slightly, testing. Nora's heart hammered, but her voice stayed cold. Touch that door again and I press send on the 911 call I have queued. The FBI field office is 8 minutes away. You'll be in custody in 10. Silence. Then footsteps, moving away down the hall. She waited a full 5 minutes before checking the peephole again. Empty hallway. But something had been left propped against her door, a manila envelope unsealed. Using a towel to avoid leaving prints, Nora retrieved it. Inside was a single photograph, obviously taken with a telephoto lens. Her, walking out of the federal courthouse that afternoon. Someone had drawn a red X over her face. No note. None needed. Nora stared at the photo for a long moment, then did something that would have surprised Lawrence if he'd known. She smiled. Cold. Sharp. Absolutely devoid of fear. You just made this so much easier, she said to the empty room. She pulled out her phone and called Holloway. We need to add witness intimidation and conspiracy to obstruct justice to the charges. And I need protective custody arranged for the Stonegate victims. Lawrence is getting desperate. The federal grand jury convened on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind of weather that seemed deliberately designed for days of reckoning. Nora sat in the witness box for 3 hours, walking 23 jurors through every thread of evidence she'd compiled. Bank records, email correspondence, sentencing data analyzed and cross-referenced with Stonegate's occupancy reports. The spreadsheet with children reduced to line items and profit margins. She showed them the photograph that had been left at her hotel door. Played the audio recording of Garrett's threats in the hallway. Connected every dot until the picture was so clear a child could see it. When she finished, the jury foreman, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a spine of steel, looked physically ill. And you're certain, the foreman asked quietly, that Judge Lawrence personally orchestrated all of this? Beyond any reasonable doubt, Nora replied. The evidence is overwhelming. The grand jury voted to indict 47 minutes later. Racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to violate civil rights, witness tampering, obstruction of justice. Each count carried years in federal prison. The formal arraignment was scheduled for 2 p.m. in Judge Chen's courtroom. Lawrence arrived with his lawyer and 2 federal marshals, his wrists secured in handcuffs that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The man who'd terrorized defendants from his bench for years now stood before one, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Judge Chen read the charges in a voice that could have carved marble. Lawrence's face remained blank, but Nora saw his jaw working, the muscles twitching beneath the skin. His lawyer whispered something urgent in his ear. How does the defendant plead? Judge Chen asked. Lawrence's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client wishes to enter a plea of not guilty. Lawrence's voice cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot. His lawyer froze, turning to stare at him in obvious horror. Your Honor, the lawyer stammered. I need a moment to confer with my... I said not guilty. Lawrence lurched to his feet, his handcuffs rattling. This is a witch hunt. A persecution. I've served this district with honor for 17 years and this child comes in with her fake credentials and manufactured evidence. Mr. Lawrence, sit down, Judge Chen commanded. But something in Lawrence had finally snapped. The careful mask he'd maintained throughout the hearing shattered completely. You have no authority over me. None of you do. I am a judge. I don't answer to bureaucrats and federal overreach and some uppity little marshals, Judge Chen said sharply. Lawrence bolted. Despite the handcuffs, despite the marshals flanking him, he actually tried to run. He made it 3 steps toward the side exit before the marshals tackled him, driving him to the floor with enough force that people in the gallery gasped. "I'll bury you," Lawrence screamed as they hauled him upright. His composure completely shattered. "All of you. I have friends, I have connections, you can't just—" "Remove him," Judge Chin ordered, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. The marshals dragged Lawrence toward the doors, his expensive shoes squeaking against the polished floor as he struggled. As they passed Nora's seat, he twisted to look at her, his face contorted with rage and something else. Fear, raw and desperate. "This isn't over," he spat. Nora met his eyes without flinching. "Yes," she said quietly. "It is." The conference room on the 8th floor of the Federal Judicial Oversight Commission had been converted into something resembling a war room. 3 long tables covered with case files, each one representing a life derailed by Lawrence's corruption. 237 folders in total, though Nora suspected there were more they hadn't found yet. She'd been working 18-hour days for 3 weeks, personally reviewing every conviction Lawrence had handed down in the past 37 months. Each file required meticulous analysis, verifying the original charges, checking if the sentence fell outside standard guidelines, confirming whether Stonegate had been involved. Some cases were obvious. Others required her to reconstruct entire trials from transcripts, looking for the subtle tells that marked Lawrence's prejudice. The 17-year-old from the holding cell, Keisha Williams, had been her first priority. 72 hours for contempt of court, for crying. Nora had the conviction vacated within 48 hours and personally delivered the expungement order to Keisha's grandmother. The old woman had cried and tried to hug her. Nora had allowed it, though physical affection still felt foreign and uncomfortable. Marcus Chin, the kid who'd gotten 9 months for shoplifting. Conviction overturned. Record expunged. DeAndre Johnson, 6 months for marijuana possession, first offense. Overturned. Talia Brooks, a year for missing a probation check-in while hospitalized. Overturned. One by one, Nora dismantled Lawrence's legacy of cruelty. Each exoneration felt like pulling a splinter from an infected wound, painful, necessary, and nowhere near sufficient to undo the damage already done. These kids had lost months, sometimes years, missed graduations, lost scholarships, suffered trauma that no court order could erase. But it was something. It had to be something. Director Holloway found her at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, surrounded by files and empty coffee cups. He set a fresh cup on her desk, the good coffee from his private reserve, which meant he wanted something. 212 convictions overturned, he said, settling into the chair across from her. Stonegate has filed for bankruptcy. Lawrence is looking at 23 years minimum. And the state legislature just passed emergency judicial reform legislation. He paused. "You did this, Nora." She didn't look up from the file she was reading. "We did this. I have an offer for you." Holloway leaned forward. Permanent position. Senior Auditor, Judicial Misconduct Division. You'd lead your own team, investigate cases like Lawrence across the entire Eastern District. Full autonomy, full authority. Nora's pen stopped moving. She'd been expecting this conversation, had been dreading it in the way she dreaded all decisions that required her to acknowledge what she wanted versus what was logical. "It means more courtrooms," Holloway continued. "More judges who think they're untouchable. More kids who need someone willing to stand in front of a gavel and refuse to blink." She thought about Keisha in that holding cell, shoulders shaking. About the spreadsheet that had reduced children to inventory. About Lawrence's face when he realized he'd underestimated the girl in the hoodie. "I'll need my own budget," Nora said finally. "And veto power over team assignments. I work with people I trust or I work alone. Holloway smiled. Done. And one more thing. She looked up, meeting his eyes. Every kid who testifies against a corrupt judge gets their college application fees waived. Full ride scholarships if they qualify. These kids lost enough already. That's not in our jurisdiction. Make it happen, Nora said quietly. Or find someone else. Holloway studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand. Welcome aboard, Senior Auditor Cain. She shook it, her grip firm and sure. Outside the window, the city stretched into darkness, full of courtrooms where gavels fell like hammers, where justice was supposed to be blind but too often just looked the other way. Nora had 237 reasons to care now. 237 names written in her notepad. And she was just getting started. Nora Cain proved that one person with courage and evidence can bring down an empire of corruption. But her story raises a question we all need to answer. How many Judge Lawrences are still out there, hiding behind their gavels? If this story made you angry, made you think, or gave you hope that justice can still win, hit that subscribe button. We're diving into more stories of people who refused to back down when the system tried to silence them. Drop a comment below. Have you or someone you know ever faced a corrupt system? What would you have done in Nora's position? Your stories matter, and this community is listening. And if you believe this message needs to reach more people, smash that like button and share this video. Someone out there needs to know that standing up to power isn't just possible. It's necessary. Nora started with a notepad and a hoodie. Imagine what we can do together. Subscribe, like, comment. Let's hold the system accountable.